Now, Farid says we don't even need to refute the people who are skeptical about Muhammad's existence and skeptical about the historical reliability of the Hadith, because
other academics have refuted them.
now that only shows how academics who uncritically assume the reliability of the Hadith, and there are far too many of those, feed into the narrative of Islamic apologists.
Thank you, Robert, for stating that Western academics concede to the arguments that Muslims make in support of their tradition. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is a short video response to Robert Spencer's response to my video in response to Yasir Qadhi. We're gonna have some fun in this one. Robert Spencer is one of the most popular critics of Islam and the Quran, and yet, despite spending decades attempting to take down Islam, he doesn't know that the Quran is referred to as a mushaf.
And so even if it were true that the academics had established the Uthmanic Mushaf as authentic, and the Uthmanic Mushaf, that is...
Yasir Qadhi, is this the type of person that you're struggling to deal with? Is this the type of guy that keeps you up at night?
You asked me excellent question.
Okay, so before we get into it, I want you guys to keep something in mind. In my response video to Yasir Qadhi, I said that if you're having a discussion with a Christian academic, all you have to do is point out that the report is correctly attributed to a second-generation source. And that second-generation source is a common link, and multiple people are quoting that second-generation source. And then the Christian academic that you're speaking to is going to be obligated to accept the report. Why? It's because Christian academics rely on second-generation sources like Luke and Mark. They were not from the first generation, they were from the second generation. Anyways, this is what he had to say.
They were transmitted by reliable people over a course of a couple of centuries until they were finally written down. And Farid thinks that this is a major improvement over Christianity, and that therefore you can reply to Christians who make these arguments by pointing to the Gospels of Mark and Luke. That is, Mark was the disciple of St. Peter, Luke was the disciple of St. Paul. They were not present at the time that Jesus was walking on earth and speaking, and so he's comparing that favorably to traditions that come from Muhammad's companions. But this is incredibly stupid, because Mark and Luke, we actually have copies of Mark and Luke going back to the time that shortly after they were written, and Mark was, as I said, the disciple of St. Peter, and Luke the disciple of St. Paul. Now, that is being compared to not writings of Muhammad's companions, the Tabirun. We don't have any writings of those people. We only have material that is supposedly passed on reliably by them to many others, and only written down a couple of hundred years later. And so Farid is just not only repeating this discredited traditional view, but comparing it favorably, or trying to compare it favorably, to a situation in Christianity that actually creates the conditions for a much greater likelihood of reliability than is even possible in Islam.
Okay, guys, here's what we're dealing with. I made a little image to give you an idea of how we get this information from Jesus, peace be upon him, and from Muhammad, peace be upon him. All of this stuff comes from manuscripts, guys. These books didn't fall from the sky. They came in the form of manuscripts. The manuscripts, you have usually multiple manuscripts to a specific book of hadith. You know, you have like hundreds, if not thousands of manuscripts that go back to Sahih Bukhari. You got a lot that go back to Muslim, and we have hundreds of books of hadith, right? These books of hadith, they quote early narrators of hadith, usually referred to as a common link, okay? A common link is when you have multiple people quoting one specific person who's known for distributing the hadith. In many cases, as I said in my previous video in response to Yasir Qadhi, in many cases, that's someone from the second generation. And as I said again, it's so easy to prove this. And that's why you have academics that say, these are skeptical academics like Yonbol and Schacht. They say, yeah, this person is second generation, he narrated this hadith, and this hadith is correctly attributed to him. This is a skeptical opponent of Islam who attacks Islam. They will admit that these second generation narrators did narrate these hadiths. However, what they'll say is, hey, we don't trust him quoting the first generation narrator. He most likely lied about the first generation narrator. That's pretty much it. So what I'm saying is, in my previous video, is if you get to the second generation, that's it. Because you then can use this against any Christian. Because the Christian will say, hey, we have no issues taking from Luke. Luke is second generation, right? Now, in regards to the Tabi'i, the second generation narrator, between him and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is one person. So this is good. This is great. This is how, if all historical works were like this, we'd be in a much better place. It's so rare when you have a second generation source quoting a report that happened a generation ago. So that's quite rare, actually. But what we have here in Gospel of Luke, Luke is second generation. But the problem with Luke is that Luke is quoting someone. We don't know who it is. We don't know who Luke is quoting. That person may be quoting Jesus. It's possible that person never met Jesus. So Robert Spencer is saying that Luke is a student of Paul. So what? Paul never met Jesus. The information about the life of Jesus, if it's coming from Paul, then it's disconnected. This does not match. This cannot be seen as authentic if you're going to use the Muslim standard, because the Muslim standard says you need to rely on eyewitnesses. Luke is relying on someone we got no idea who he's relying on. Okay? Now, in terms of the manuscript tradition from Luke is mainly from the 3rd and 4th century. Robert Spencer says, the manuscript tradition is from, it's written really soon. It came really soon after the time of Luke. How soon?
Mark and Luke, we actually have copies of Mark and Luke going back to the time that shortly after they were written.
2-3 centuries. Yeah? Now, that's what we find with Muslim manuscript tradition. A lot of it's 2 to 3 centuries. But Mr. Robert Spencer here, to him, that doesn't work with Muslims. If Muslims have texts that come 2-3 centuries later, then you can't use them. But he's got no issues using them for Luke. That's a double standard, Robert. That's a double standard.
He once actually made another video defending the reliability of the Hadith, claiming that various sources dated from the 7th and 8th centuries, when actually we only have copies of them from the 9th century and beyond. So this is the kind of high-level intellect we're dealing with.
In any case, sometimes, by the way, guys, the common link will be the first generation narrator. Sometimes the common link would be Rasulullah, where you have many companions narrating from him. So yeah, I just stuck with second generation. The reason I mentioned second generation is because you have skeptical critics of Islam that will admit that sometimes the common link is the second generation, and they attribute the hadith to the second generation. If it's good enough for them, if Luke is good enough for them, then the hadith is definitely good enough for them. And if they say it's not good enough for them, then that's a double standard.
Anyway, then he says that terrible, evil people are taking advantage of what Qadi is saying. And he shows me and Hatun blurred out. And I thought, I couldn't help but laugh because, all right, in the beginning, he's got Qadi talking to a couple of people who have an Islamic podcast. And one of them is a woman and her hair's uncovered. And so Farid blurs her out. And you can understand that. But why on earth does he blur us out?
Okay, Robert, so the thing is, I didn't blur you out in the video. What happened was your video screen was minimized here on the side. So when I enlarged it, the video quality came off like that. As for Hatun, Robert, I know what you're trying to do. I know you're trying to take a dig and it's shameful. You know, and your audience knows, that Hatun is genetically categorized as female. Shame on you. Anyhow, I don't have anything more to add to this video. I'll catch you guys in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And so even if it were true that the academics had established the Uthmanic Mushaf as authentic,